conférence de presse à l'issue de notre réunion
Welcome to the
informelle.
press conference following
Président
our
du Conseil
informal
européen,
meeting
je donne la
of
parole.
the Council of the European Union. I give you
Bonjour
the
à
floor.
chacune et à chacun. Je souhaite
Good
naturellement
afternoon
commencer
to all of
par
you.
remercier
Obviously, I'd like to
le
begin
président
by
français pour
thanking
son
the French
hospitalité
President for his
dans
hospitality
ce magnifique endroit qui
in
est à la
this
fois chargé
magnificent
d'histoire et qui
setting,
nous
which
permet
is
aussi d'être
full
au
of
travail
history,
en
and
regardant
it's
le
also made it
futur
possible for us
et le futur de
to
l'Union européenne en
work with a
particulier
view to the
dans un
future,
moment qui est
particularly
un
the future
moment
of Europe,
difficile parce
at a
que nous sommes
moment which is a
confrontés
difficult one, because
à une
we
guerre
are
qui frappe le
facing
continent
a
européen.
war on the continent
Cette
of Europe.
déclaration de Versailles qui a été
The
approuvée
Versailles
formellement il y a
Declaration has
quelques
been
instants
formally approved a few
restera
moments ago,
dans les annales du
and it
projet
will
européen.
remain in the
Elle
annals
restera
of
dans les
the
annales du projet
European
européen parce
projects.
que
And
nous avons depuis quelque
there's a reason for
temps
this. For some
compris
time
et
now, we
considéré
have
que l'on
understood
devait engager
that it is
un agenda
essential
de
to
souveraineté,
embark upon an
un
agenda
agenda
of
d'autonomie
sovereignty,
stratégique pour
of
l'Union
strategic
européenne
autonomy for the
qui se
European
traduit
Union,
au travers de notre ambition
to be
de
seen
prendre en
reflected in its
considération les
ambition
forces,
to
les
take
atouts,
into consideration the
le ciment qui rassemble
strengths,
les
the
Européens, mais de
advantages,
regarder
what
aussi
brings
quels sont les
Europeans
points de
together,
fragilité
but
que
also
l'on va
take a look
tenter
at the
de
fragilities that
corriger, quels sont
exist.
les
We're
points
going to
qu'il faut
try
tenter
to
de renforcer.
correct and
Et
strengthen.
cette réunion de Versailles
This
intervient à un
meeting
moment
at Versailles
où la
comes at
Russie,
a moment
il y a 2
when,
semaines, a
just
déclenché
2 weeks ago,
une guerre contre
Russia
l'Ukraine.
embarked upon
Il y
a
a un
war
moment
against
où,
Ukraine.
depuis 2 semaines,
And for 2
l'Union
weeks now,
européenne a
the
démontré
European
son
Union has
unité,
demonstrated
sa robustesse,
how
sa
strong it
solidité.
is, how
Nous
solid
avons
it
été
is,
capables de nous
how
rassembler
united it is. We've been
pour
able to
décider
come
des
together
sanctions
to
sans
decide in
précédent,
favour of
qui ont un
unprecedented
impact, qui ont un
sanctions,
effet.
which
Nous
have
avons été capables de nous rassembler pour soutenir fortement le peuple ukrainien qui se bat avec courage. Soutien sur le plan financier,
We're
sur le
there to
plan humanitaire,
support
soutien bien
in
sûr
every way
en termes
possible,
d'accueil des réfugiés, soutien aussi,
financially,
c'est une
in
première qui a été
humanitarian
décidée
terms,
et qui traduit
the men
l'ambition
and women
d'agir
of
sur le plan de la
Ukraine.
défense européenne au travers de la
We
facilité
have a European
qui mobilise
ambition,
du matériel, y
which is
compris
one of peace.
militaire,
We've been
et
mobilising
l'orientation a été
equipment,
prise
including military
d'ajouter 500
equipment,
millions d'euros
and some
additionnels à la
500
facilité paix
million
dans
euros
ce cadre.
additionally has been
Vous le
added
voyez,
to
nous
the
sommes engagés sur le
peace
terrain de soutien à
facility.
l'Ukraine. Nous
So
avons
we're
bien
there
sûr
to support
un débat sur
Ukraine.
la demande
We've
qui a
also
été
been
introduite par
discussing
l'Ukraine,
the
même demande qui a été
application
introduite
by
par la Géorgie
Ukraine, as
et
it
la
was by
Moldavie. Nous
Georgia
voulons
and
dire
Moldova,
avec solennité,
and
avec
we
force
wanted to
à nos amis
make our
ukrainiens
point
qui sont bien entendu
clear to our Ukrainian friends, who of course are full members of the European family, and we want to say to them that we will stand by them and mobilise very quickly in order to strengthen the links that we have with the population of Ukraine, and we will also be there to support their choices on their path, which is a European path. We have also had the opportunity to discuss the way in which Europe can embark upon the agenda of sovereignty. Let me quickly run through the 3 pillars that we have today set out in the declaration. We are looking to the future in this way to give an impetus to the European project, to make it a committed and robust one. First of all, we have the question of energy. This is not new today, this challenge of energy. We decided to embark upon climate neutrality by 2050, and the idea is to move towards greater independence while facing the humanitarian challenges. And there are a number of points that we want, obviously, to deal with. First of all, there's the question of prices and the impact for families throughout Europe, and also for businesses. The question of dependence, which is too great. That's what we're seeing today, particularly our dependence on Russia, and we're pursuing that ambition. We want to release ourselves from that dependency so that we can act as best we can in line with our own interests, in line with our objectives, and obviously for the next winter we need a particular plan. Now, all of this is agreed on by the Council, together with the Commission, which is going to be following up on our work here. And this is a very consistent agenda that has been initiated. Secondly, the question of defence and security. Defence Europe. We've been talking about this for a long time. Some progress has already been made, but there's no denying the fact that 2 weeks ago we woke up in a different Europe, in a different world. We can't deny the fact that the actions taken over the last few days, in fact, consecrate the emergence of a European defence. It has formally been initiated through the meeting today in Versailles. And we have now an operational strategy in which we will identify the actions and investments that are going to be necessary. We've also identified how it's going to be possible to roll out a European industrial base, taking on board the different challenges, that of cybersecurity, that of space, for instance, just to cite two examples. So there too, there's a timeline, an agenda that has been set. That is a mission for the Commission, and progress will be made further. Third point that I'd like to mention, the importance of consolidating our economic base. Europe is there to work in the interest of peace, security and prosperity. There's an economic pillar, in other words. So it's up to us, it's up to our generation to take decisions today that are going to make that economic base far more robust, far more resilient. And here I can refer to what we've done in the area of health. We've seen with COVID how important it is to coordinate even further. There's also the ambition linked to the semiconductors, chips, raw materials, critical materials, and, of course, the vital need to continue to be committed to innovation, particularly technological innovation. So just in a few words, that's what I can say about these very significant decisions that have been taken today. And there's a real awareness shared by all of the leaders of Europe here in Versailles. We're all aware of the importance of the moment that we're living through and the decisions that we're taking, not just for tomorrow and the next few months, but for coming generations.
La paix, la prospérité, la sécurité.
We must move towards peace, prosperity and security. These are the challenges we must pick up so that we can see tangible results. More independence, more sovereignty, less fragility, and a greater ability to determine our own fate for the European Union. We'll have the opportunity to come back to the implementation of all of these measures because there's going to be a European Council in Brussels in 2 weeks' time. We'll be taking a look at energy and other issues. We also intend, before the June summit, to have an extraordinary summit, which means that we'll be able to take a look again at security and defence. So once again, I'd like to thank President Macron for having brought us here today in Versailles at such a symbolic place, symbolic moment. It's at the heart of European history. And yesterday and today, we came together to carry through this ambition for Europe. Thank you.
Merci Charles, merci Emmanuel.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you for hosting us in such a historic site. We're talking about the future of Ukraine and the future of the European Union and our democracies. And it is that history that is being written as I speak. Our destinies are linked. Ukraine is a member of the European family. Putin's aggression against Ukraine is an aggression, an attack against all the principles that we hold dear. It's an attack against democracy, against sovereignty of states, against the freedoms of a people to choose its own destiny and shape its own future. The way in which we respond today to this odious attack by Russia against Ukraine will determine the future of Ukraine and also the future of our Union, and going beyond that, even the future of the entire European continent. So let us remain faithful to the principles that have been our guiding principles in our common responses to date. It's responsibility, unity, solidarity and determination.
Made us face up to our responsibilities in the face of a new reality. First, our duty to continue ensuring reliable, secure and affordable supply of energy to European consumers. In the midterm, this means getting rid of our dependency on Russian gas by diversification of supply, by massively investing in renewables. Renewables are homegrown, they create jobs here in Europe. They are a strategic investment in our security and in our independence. And this is why the European Commission outlined Repower EU this week. Repower EU is a plan to diversify suppliers and switch to renewables. By mid-May, we will come up with a proposal to phase out our dependency on Russian gas, oil and coal by 2027, backed by the necessary national and European resources. But we also addressed energy price spikes. By mid-May, the Commission will present options to optimize the electricity market design so that it better supports the green transition. But consumers and business need relief now, and therefore this week the Commission came forward with guidance on price regulation in these exceptional circumstances and the possibility of a new temporary crisis framework for state aid to support struggling businesses. This is complemented by the option given to Member States to tax windfall profits from energy groups. And finally, by the end of this month, the Commission will present options to limit the contagion effect of the rise of gas prices to electricity prices. Finally, we need to be ready for the next winter, so we will set up a task force that will design a refilling plan for the next winter and coordinate the operation. Beyond this first step, the European Union needs to define a longer-term EU gas storage policy, and therefore the Commission will table a proposal to fill up underground gas storages to at least 90% of their capacity by the 1st of October each year. So you see, it's a whole big package, and this will be our insurance policy against supply disruption. Similarly, the leaders also discussed food prices and global food security. And here too the Commission will come forward with options to address these important issues. Putin's war has also fundamentally altered Europe's security environment. To defend Europe, we will need different forces and different capabilities. Significant additional defence investments in Europe will be needed, and I welcome that some leaders have announced ambitious steps to increase defence spending. More will follow. But we need to avoid fragmentation. Thus, we need a coordinated approach, because this only will ensure that we maintain a military technological edge in our European industrial base and that interoperability is given between our European armed forces. This will be the focus of our work in the next weeks to come. I want to be very clear that we need to closely coordinate also with NATO. NATO is the strongest military alliance in the world. Thus, I welcome that the leaders have tasked us to prepare an analysis of the defence investment gaps and to make sure that we have a clear plan how to deal with those gaps in Europe by mid-May, when the Commission is presenting the results of this undertaking. The second principle I mentioned was unity. It certainly guided us when we swiftly imposed altogether 3 successive waves of sanctions on the Kremlin. With an immediate, hard-hitting effect, we will now come forward with a 4th package of sanctions. These sanctions will further isolate Russia from the global economic system, increasing further the cost of Putin's invasion to Ukraine. And finally, a word on solidarity, which so many Europeans are showing shining examples of in these days by welcoming with open arms more than 2 million people who have now fled the war in Ukraine. I want to thank all EU member states and in particular the countries in the front line, that is Poland, Romania, Slovakia and Hungary, and of course our partner Moldova. Because the people of Ukraine need and deserve all support, and so do the countries that welcome them. The Commission has set up a solidarity platform to coordinate operational and financial support and reception capacity. We're also using the flexibility of the EU budget to the fullest so that member states can finance actions for refugees, like, for example, housing or schooling or medical care and other topics. This flexibility within the Commission could free several billion euros over the coming years for exactly these purposes. The Ukrainian people are showing immense courage, and a people that stands up so bravely for European values is clearly part of the European family of nations. So while this terrible war rages on, we should already reflect carefully about what comes next. The membership applications of Ukraine are expressions of national sovereignty, of its will and its right to choose its own destiny. Today, we have opened the pathway towards us for Ukraine. They are part of the European family. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Monsieur le Président de la République, vous avez...
The President of the Republic. President, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us here at the end of the summit of Versailles. President Michel and President von der Leyen have spoken clearly. We're in the Galerie des Batailles, and if anyone thought that war in Europe belonged to history, for the last 2 weeks we've seen that the choice by Russia under President Putin was to bring war back to Europe. In the face of this and the unheard of violence of Russia against Ukraine and its population is a tragic turning point for our history. We're all aware of the fact that it's a turning point as well for our societies, for our peoples and for our European project. For the last 2 weeks, our response, ladies and gentlemen, this has just been said, we've responded through unity, rapidity and a spirit of responsibility. Choices were made very quickly, all 27, with our institutions and coordinated with all of our partners in the context of NATO and G7. Diplomatic work has made it possible to isolate Russia, inter alia, recently at the General Assembly of the United Nations. For 2 weeks now, Ukrainian men and women have been fighting courageously to defend their freedom, their democracy, their sovereignty and the integrity of their land. Europeans have a clear position, unanimous and firm condemnation of the Russian aggression at all international levels, and we've drawn full consequences of this, inter alia with the resolution that was adopted at the General Assembly. Support to Ukraine. Together we've agreed to deliver hardware, not just humanitarian material, but also weapons. And we've proposed today that the European facility be added to the tune of some 500 million, which is going to allow us to go further in this line. Countries that in the past were traditionally neutral, Sweden, for instance, have decided for the very first time that for the first time in decades they would take an active role in the support to Ukraine. We also have economic support, humanitarian support. This will be continued. Some 2 million refugees have been welcomed. Madam von der Leyen has referred to this, and I'd like to thank the populations of the neighbouring countries, Poland, Hungary, Romania and Moldova as well. And obviously France will be playing its role, and I would hope that we will be able to have the necessary mechanisms of solidarity that can be used in this overall approach. As of the very outset, we also deployed massive, unheard of sanctions, and this was done very quickly. Second, fourth, 6 days of conflict, they were marked by European decisions of these unprecedented sanctions. We're willing to adopt other sanctions, and all options are on the table. The point of our discussion is to prepare ourselves for these sanctions if they were able to call a halt to the attack and the aggression, and could prepare us also for the consequences in the coming weeks and months. Our initial objective is, of course, a rapid return to peace, starting with a ceasefire, followed by a rapid withdrawal of Russian troops. And that is why keeping up pressure on Russia. And we're also maintaining a very demanding dialogue, in particular in conjunction with the German Chancellor. So the support to solidarity for Ukraine is what kept us very busy, particularly yesterday. We support Ukraine today, and we will do that for as long as the war lasts. And we will be there for the reconstruction of this destruction brought about by Russia. We will be there to help it to stand up and stay standing. The message that we've sent out to the Ukrainian population is that the path to our Europe is open to them. Their fight for freedom and democracy, for the values that we all share, has demonstrated that Ukraine is indeed a member of our European family. We also want the applications made by Moldova and Georgia as well be examined in line with our treaty by the European Commission, so that the acceptability can be determined in line with the provisions of our treaty. The Versailles Declaration, the agenda of Versailles that we've been discussing today, is linked to the fact that sovereignty in Europe, which might have been thought of by some as a slogan or a sort of French fantasy, is seen by all today as being crucial. This sovereignty, this strategy of independence has been there at the very start, also of the pandemic. We've seen what had to be done. It's there when we had to produce and deliver vaccines for ourselves and for other countries. We've seen it when we came out of the crisis, the start of the recovery, when we saw what was happening as regards the semiconductors, when we had delegated production to the other parts of the world, how difficult it was to return to the manufacturing of cars, for instance. And we're seeing it in the context of this crisis, where we can see how our food, our energy, our defence are all issues of sovereignty. We can cooperate. We want to be open to the world, but we want to choose our partners and not depend on any. That is what we mean by sovereignty. It's not protectionism. It's not a question of closing the door. It's a question of having the possibility of staying open without being dependent. So the Versailles agenda has set out the next few months' work along those lines. As regards defence, we want to be able to define the investments that we need. Several of us are already at the level of 2% of GDP invested in defence. Others have further efforts to make, but we're going to make coordinated efforts. We're going to identify our needs in budgetary terms. We're going to identify capabilities that are required. We'll also identify our needs when it comes to possible new conflicts, whether we're talking about shipping, maritime space, and also identify what we need in order to develop the European industrial tissue. If we're going to import more in the way of hardware from elsewhere, then there's not much point pursuing this sort of sovereignty. We need to think in terms of partnerships, yes, but we have to be able to decide to consolidate and to construct a defence industry with fewer standards, but corresponding to an integrated market. So there are a number of decisions that we've already taken.
About 10 days ago, Germany in turn decided to make historic investments for the country. And Denmark made an historic choice, deciding to ask the people if they want to come back to the European security and defence project. You can see that everywhere around the European continent, historic choices are being made, and this is a major turning point. We need to have the organization so that we can build this joint ambition in defense. And this is what we have asked the Commission to do, so that by May, when we will no doubt have an extraordinary meeting of the Council before the NATO summit in June, the summit meeting in June, we will work up a plan which is full for investment to get our industries up to the right capacity and capability level. And then we've got the question of climate strategy. We've started building our own independence. Getting out of fossil energy is a matter of becoming independent. And we know that moving away from coal was a special point. Then we moved to gas, but that's gas that we have imported and are still importing from Russia. The situation that we're in at the moment, and which we will have tomorrow, means we have to reassess this strategy and be even more ambitious with our climate plans. And for that, we will have a check on this by late March and see how we can provide the support for our populations for pricing. And we're going to work on this at the Commission with concrete objectives for prices and for refilling, so that we can guarantee there are mechanisms, which means that we're not subjected to the contingencies of the market or speculation of the market in particular in crisis situations. Many of you have already taken steps to protect our citizens and companies, and we need to have a European choices. And in the 2 weeks to come, we will do our best so that we can stand up to the price shock which comes from the geopolitical context. Prices were going up before the war, and they're continuing to increase because of the war. Then, of course, we have the sanctions which are coming in, and we must prepare ourselves so that we are not so sensitive to the dependency on Russia. And this is what we've scheduled for May for the Commission. As the two presidents pointed out, we have the plan to step out of the dependency on fossil fuels from Russia so that we can get out by 2027, so that we are no longer dependent on Russian gas, oil and coal. That's by 2027. This means there has to be new investment, new facilities, so that we can support our choices for renewables and for nuclear energy. You can see that March and May will be very busy for energy subjects. And there are other issues that we will have to work together on to ensure that we are independent and sovereign. There's the food strategy. And whether we're talking about wheat or maize or grain crops in general, we know that Ukraine and Russia are two huge markets. And Europe has already been upset by the war on the food supply market, and this will be even more so in 12 to 18 months with the impact on Ukraine and crops there. And there will be a major disturbance to food supplies in feed supplies. So we have to strike a new balance and look at food production so that we can have autonomy for our food production and for protein production. And we must reassess the strategy for Africa, because a number of African countries are going to be hit by famines in the next 12 to 18 months because of this war. Then there's sovereignty for other commodities and raw materials, for rare materials. And I've mentioned the question of semiconductors, there's healthcare. I won't go through the whole list, but we have this agenda. We will be going through this in the months to come with very concrete proposals for investments which will make it possible to have more sovereign and more independent Europe. We will be encouraging private investments. This is the idea with the tax on energy. And we're going to have the union of capitals, and we're going to look at the single market in different sectors. And we have to have the appropriate monetary possible. We're not going back in to normal now, it's quite clear, and the the Central European Bank will be following its work and will be doing this very clearly in the current geopolitical context. And we'll have national investment policies to protect us from the impact of the war, to fund our solidarity, to fund our resistance to the impact of the war, and to defend our sovereignty. But the next point is that we need to have means of funding these major strategies, funding from Europe. And these are the things I mentioned, and this is why we need to have joint funding. We need to coordinate our investments, and we should do it in a European context so that we don't see the financial markets being broken up and different forms of sovereign debt. And this is what we've been working on as our strategy, and we'll be working on it for the months to come. And here we will have to be acting together, acting swiftly and with a spirit of responsibility. The Ukrainians have given us an example which is quite unique, the example of courage. We are not waging war. Europe is not waging war on Russia, but we're supporting Ukraine and we're sanctioning Russia. But we must have the courage to make historic decisions, to see that the defense of democracy and our values has a cost. The choice of independence has a cost. And sometimes we have to go back on some of the dogmas that we've been following for years, the different habits and ways of organizing things which we had. And I can tell you that the discussions we had yesterday and today have realized this awareness. And we can see there's a real ambition here from the Europeans here in Versailles to advance in that direction. And I would like to conclude on that. We started the work yesterday by extending thanks to some of the colleagues, and I would like to say this to the President of the Commission, because here in Versailles it's a very historic site which the French, of course, love above all, and which we're very proud of, and we see it and it's known around the world. But it's a site which is also the site of diplomatic defeats. It's the site where we lost peace at the end of the World War. And we were there with an ambition to humiliate and divide Europe with the Treaty of Versailles. And despite the difficulties we've had here today with the emotions and different attitudes, we did have a unanimous agreement on the fact that the only way of protecting our continent was through unity, through courage and unity. That's the most important thing. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I would like to